Hello, so in this video I'm going to quickly go over how we made the sand material for one of our renders. We wanted to have our business card rendered sort of on a pebbly sandy beach, and this is the scene that we set up, and we've already made a video quickly going over this. But just to start with, I'll quickly show you again what this looks like. Just before I get into actually how we did it, plan is just to show you from scratch exactly everything I did to recreate this. If we give this a second just to render here, I'll just be showing you how to do the sand, not so much the water part. So as you can see, the floor is broken up into all these different little pebbly bits, sand particles, and we ended up doing this just through texture maps. There isn't actually any geometry here, and the end result looks quite nice, I think. It's very quick, quite a light scene. If I go back, you can see that the floor is just, a sort of warped wavy mesh with a good amount of subdivisions, and the warping is really just to give it some kind of shape so it's not perfectly flat, and then I've gone in and scattered a few extra little bits and pieces. But outside of that, that's really it. It's a very simple scene. Most of it's just texture maps. So what I'll do is just show you now how to actually set this up. So if I go ahead and I will just delete all of this except for the sunlight, because we're going to need that later, and just hide this. And if I go ahead and create a new plane, just scale this up a bit, and then maybe give this one extra subdivision, because we'll be using displacement maps, and that kind of relies on your geometry you'll be displacing having some level of subdivision. Otherwise, it really won't look accurate or fine detail enough, especially for sand, which in this case is quite small particles. Obviously, there are a few different types of sand. This is just kind of the one we went through. Not the most exciting topic ever, but this is kind of what we like. So what we have, I'm going to use a slightly different texture to the one we were using in our actual render. So we have a color map, a displacement map, that's going to be driving most of the actual shape. A normal map, that kind of, it just fakes the sort of like 3D geometry, if you like. If we were to put that on just a flat surface, it would kind of just make the reflections accurate, but it wouldn't actually add any geometry. It's kind of faking it, and it looks good from a distance but not up close, but we'll still be using it just for the little micro details. And the roughness, and this just defines how shiny something is, really. If we take a quick look at these, this is the color map that we're dealing with. So this is just real image taken outside of various different river pebbles. It's not quite sand, but for our purposes this will work quite well, and we can go ahead and modify this and make this repeat various different times so that we can get this much smaller. And then this is the displacement map. So the white areas are the most raised. If you think of this as values between 0 and 1, black to white, white is the most raised and black is the lowest point. So it's kind of just saying, a value between 0 and 1, black and white, how up and down something is pushed. And this will give us the overall shape. And this is what we're relying on, really, to create most of the sand. So if I go ahead and apply a new AI standard surface shader, the render we're using for most of our work here is Arnold. And we'll just go ahead and open up the hypershade. Okay, so if we get our material up here, and then to start with, I am just going to add the color. So we'll path that in there. Okay, so we're going to take the diffuse. Now what I like to do whenever we do this, whenever we have any color, is just to run that for an AI color correct, because if for whatever reason we want to make little adjustments when it comes to render time, we can always adjust little things like gamma, the hue, saturation, contrast, all of that stuff. It's just handy. We might not need to, but it's there just in case. And I'll normally do this for the roughness as well, because it just sort of gives us a finer control sometimes of how shiny something is if we want to change that. So again, we'll take another file node and plug that in. Just going to be taking the out color red for this, because the specular roughness of AI standard surface won't accept the full color, but that's not too important to this little demonstration here. We'll just take the roughness. can take a bit of time to load the preview sometimes because it's a pretty high resolution map. And then for these, we always set the color space to raw, alpha is luminance. And then we'll also go plug in the normal map. So for that, we need a normal map node, and we plug that into the normal camera. Then again, a file for texture. This one, as you can probably guess, is the normal map. So we're going to take that. Again, we want this to be raw. So you can see here in this picture, you kind of got this. It looks kind of funky because it's like purple and blue, right? And you don't really want. That's not what sand looks like, obviously. But this is kind of just going to tell the renderer which parts are shaded and which parts are light, and that's how it fakes the whole geometry look. That's probably quite a terrible explanation, but that kind of gets the gist across. So once we have those free in, that takes us most of the way there, but it's missing the final last little ingredient, which is the displacement. So what I'll do is I'm just going to up the repeat UV here for a little bit, because otherwise this will come in very big, and we want these to be like little pebbly grains of sand. So we'll put that to 5. And it's important all of these match too, because otherwise there'll be like some mismatching and it will look weird when it comes to render. So with that, I will re-enable the light and we'll go ahead and render this. Okay, so that has finished, and here is the result that we have. It's looking a bit repetitive in places. I've never actually used this image file before to create this effect. This is a different one that we used in our actual render, but it's kind of showing you what I wanted to get across, and that's that if you look, we've got the normal map in, and it almost looks like it's 3D, right? You can see this shading here, but if you look on the edge, there's actually no change happening to the geometry whatsoever. Okay, so if I come down like this, what you can see is that there's actually no 3D geometry happening to this whatsoever. It's still just a basic plane. None of this is being displaced. It's all just texture information, right? But from certain angles, this sort of effect is used in games quite a lot, and it is also used in film and TV, and we use this quite a lot. Normally just to add smaller detail. To kind of trick the eye. Like if we looked at this from a distance, you wouldn't really be able to tell that this wasn't actually 3D, but then if you look at it from certain angles, you know, if we get down really close, you can see it's just perfectly flat still. So that is where the displacement map comes in. So we're going to open up the hypershader editor again. Okay, so we have our shade here with our normal map, color map, roughness map. Now what we're going to do is add a displacement shader. We're going to delete this part here and then plug the displacement into the displacement shader of our AI standard surface. Get another file texture. Go back to where we had our texture maps. Then we are going to take the displacement map. Let me give that a second just to load. Now it's important whenever you're using these, have this set to raw. Also tick this, otherwise Maya's going to complain every single time. And then turn on alpha is luminance. And then we're going to go ahead and plug the red of the color here into the displacement. And the scale, 1 is probably going to be way too much. I'm going to turn this down to just a 0.1 just to see what that looks like to begin with. We'll probably have to play around with these values. It's never going to be 100% to what you want straight away. The resolution of this mesh also probably not high enough. What I'll do is go ahead, give it another subdivision, and then just to save us some headache when actually looking at the viewport, I'm going to turn on some subdivision at render time. For this kind of like low detail sand particles, we want the resolution to be quite high, so I'm just going to have this get subdivided 3 times at render time. And this could still not be enough, but we'll render it and take a look. Fingers crossed this doesn't crash. My Maya has been playing up a little bit recently. But we'll go ahead and see what this looks like. Again, anytime you do this, you're always going to be adjusting values after you actually plug in a texture map. So by the looks of it, it's not working for some reason. That can also happen sometimes when you're using Maya. Unexpectedly, things will just not work. That could be because it's not updated. Let's go ahead and just whack the scale up to 1 just to see what happens. There we go. Okay, so, okay, now you can see it's being displaced, but what I forgot to do was change the repeat UV to 5, like the rest of the textures. So if we do that, now what you can see is it is displacing, probably way too much, and you can see it's also quite low resolution, and again that's where the subdivisions of the mesh are going to come in. So if we just change this down to like 0.5, you can see now we're already getting some kind of displacement. You can see it around the edges, and you can see now there is very obviously some more geometry to this. I will just pause the render there. Then what I'll do is go ahead and maybe rack this up to 5 iterations or subdivision levels, and we'll see what that looks like. This can get quite heavy when you actually come to render, and this isn't always the best way to do this. But just for getting like very, very quick results that don't render too slowly without having to go in and manually sculpt all this stuff, it's quite a lot faster. So what you can see is that we now have quite nicely displaced ground. We could probably go ahead and add another iteration or so to this, because this is not performing too badly. The render times are not too bad at all, but you can see we're getting very clear definition around some of the bigger stones, not so much around the smaller ones. But I think for sort of our purposes this would work quite well. And the normal map as well is going in and adding like some extra little, details like on the rock here, you can see stuff like that. The displacement just won't be getting, displacement's more for big changes, and then the normal map will be for little like finer details. But essentially that's really all there is to it. That's the sand shader, at least the one we ended up making. We did go in and do a little bit more tweaking, because sand, depending on the type of sand, it's not just like pebbles like this. You get quite glassy looking ones, and we ended up going in and placing some little extra bits. But this is how we made the material.